guys! Thanks for joining me on this video. So for today, I figured I would show one of the time lapses from my Inktobers. Yes, I'm still doing Inktober. So yeah, in this one I am doing a piece of my two characters. One is the horse named Aspa, and she doesn't get along with the golden eagle character named Morg. And so the two are divided, as the prompt says in Inktober. In this one, I tend to do the pencil sketches first, and then I will go over it with my now faded pen. I can't remember which kind it is now. It's the one everybody loves. It's got a brush tip and a felt tip on dual ends. But yes, so I will put that in the description for when I can remember what it's called. I think it's the zebra inker or something like that. So I go ahead and do the pencils first and then go over top with inks. I'm still working on inks. I don't feel very strong in my ink work. I think I'm a better painter than I am inker, but that's what this challenge is for. That's why we do this and why we are working on Inktobers and making it better. So I'll take this time to update on my project. I think the last time I spoke about it, I had the idea of the Golden Troupe and I wanted to make a comic with it, and that was about it. And I didn't have any kind of ideas behind the world creation, world building. I really wasn't sure, other than the main characters, what else I was going to do. I had a couple ideas for a few plot points, but otherwise I wasn't real sure which direction I wanted to take it. Well, I've done a lot of research in the past few months, and as it turns out, I always do this to myself, but the time period at which I want to place the comic is a time period in history where there just isn't a lot of information about it. Unlike the ancient Greeks or maybe the ancient Egyptians, the Achaemenid Empire, which is where I decided to base the comic. And while there's a lot of information out there about Cyrus the Great and his descendants and the hierarchy on the thrones and all that kind of stuff, when it comes down to social niceties, different cultural customs, what daily life was like for the people who weren't royalty, all of that just seems to be a little bit of a mystery. And it's really hard to go back and judge the culture from the way it used to be when it predates Christianity and Islam quite a bit. So I can't even use like the current day customs because they've evolved over time with a totally different religion, and the religion of the time was Zoroastrianism, and it's just a totally different religion. So I've been researching that. I've been researching what I can. Every single aspect of what I've been researching turns out to be huge. I got stuck on the second page of the comic because I drew the characters and then I was like, okay, now time to draw the clothing. Great. I don't know how to draw the clothing. I don't think any of the stuff that I've drawn so far for the characters is really accurate. And while I'm not going to be doing a exact historically accurate perfect representation of the era, given that there's going to be mythological animals in my comic, I do want to at least have some semblance of, historical accuracy, and at least the costumes and the things that people wore at the time. I don't want it to come off as stereotypical or silly. I want it to be a little bit more accurate, but a lot of what I'm gathering from Pinterest boards and everything of that time period is all like ceremonial royalty, and unfortunately I just don't feel like probably the everyday person wore those kind of clothing items. So I think it's going to be a little bit difficult to decipher what exactly people did wear back then and in that area. And also, not to mention, it was a huge empire that encompassed an enormous swath of the Middle East. So several different cultures all kind of lived in relative peace and harmony within that area, and they all had unique aspects. So that could be another thing I do too, is just kind of pull from the different aspects of the different cultures that would be all integrated in that area. So that takes a huge amount of research too, given I did used to really love the Egyptian Empire, and I knew a lot about the Greeks through school and everything, and I did know a fairly decent amount, especially about the mythology of that. So it's been really interesting for me, but also really frustrating because every single aspect requires a huge amount of research attached to it. I decided to just do different pages, visual world building, and I dedicated each page to different topics. So I had the costume or the outfit for my main character, different nobility characters, what commoners wore, architecture, cultural practices, a map layout, even something as simple as like the domesticated animals of that era. It was incredibly hard to find information about like what kind of cows lived back then, what kind of cattle were raised back then. This is 2,500 years ago, so this is not something that you can just easily look up. Most of the information out there is just not very detailed, especially about these, I guess, more or less mundane topics. A lot of what I'm calling from is actually just what I happen to know about natural history, and fortunately I have a high interest in cryptozoology and just ancient zoology, so a lot of that is coming into play, and I know a lot about different animals from different areas, so that all is coming in handy, but it's still hard to find like exact animals that I would need to be able to represent them correctly in that era. And I came to find out actually something interesting. As it turns out, there's actually a lot of animals that used to exist during that time period that no longer exist. So that's going to be a really exciting part for my comic, because I just think it'll be really interesting to depict these animals that used to be so common and now don't exist at all. There's the auroch, which is a giant type of cattle, which stands about, its shoulders are higher than most people are tall, so they're enormous. They were very commonly depicted in a lot of ancient Persian art, specifically the Achaemenid Empire. Lots of things that had the auroch depicted on it. Another interesting one is that the Caspian tiger used to live in that area and now has been extinct as of, I think, 1950s. So it is going to be really interesting to kind of find these different animals that you wouldn't think necessarily. The Middle East, you don't think of tigers, but they did exist back then. They did exist in that area. So I think it'll be really cool to go ahead and depict those animals from those time periods. Another big kind of discovery / decision I made with the comic is part of the reason why I didn't really want to get started was because it was one of those things that I felt like if once I started, I wouldn't ever be able to stop again. And one, that's kind of a silly idea, because yes, while some webcomics just go and go and go and go and never seem to stop, not every webcomic is like that, and mine certainly doesn't have to be. So I came up with an idea to go ahead and do volumes for this. So I'll have like volume 1, volume 2, following along the story at different points in time and coming up with different plots along the way. And that, I feel, is very manageable. If I want to kind of take a break or do something that is related to the comic, but not exactly adding more comic pages or doing more comics, then I could do like a little side project. And I have a huge amount of side projects I've never been able to really finish because I hadn't had it join up with a greater whole. For instance, I used to have this idea for a giant book about different kinds of griffins. And while that can be interesting, If it's just a book with random griffins in it, it could be cool, but at the same time, if it was really targeted and really specific and also part of a greater story and a greater era, and maybe even had, griffins that were part Caspian tiger or something, then it could be more interesting because it will pull from the lore and the story and everything that I've already developed. And in that way, a lot of people might feel more connected to these seemingly random animals. And especially if those animals make an appearance in my story, then they might go, oh, neat, like, oh, I wanted to find out more about that animal that I saw in your comic. And then, I do a whole entire book with like a page or chapter dedicated to a particular type of animal. That could be a lot more interesting than just out of context random animals, and I come up with different facts for them, but I don't have any like real connection with them. Overall, I feel really happy about the way that all this is coming together and how I can join up a lot of the projects I used to have and I wanted to do, but I didn't really focus on, and be able to incorporate them into a greater story and mythology that I want to tell, that I want to depict. I want to show some things that I really like about Zoroastrianism as I've been researching and learning more about it. Truth is a very important thing. I think it's very poignant given our current climate and our world today that in this society, truth was held up above all else. Lying was just something that you just didn't do, and if you did, it was very, very harshly looked down upon, that you would be a liar. And I love that. As far as I can tell, there's a greater sense of community with people, and just overall kind of support and helpfulness. One thing I'm still looking into, and by the way, if you guys have any comments or know anything about this time period, by all means send links, please. But some of the things I've been discovering is that there was, especially at the Bedouins, a culture of just, they accept travelers, welcome into their home, and they would help feed them and make sure that they were all set for their next travel. So I found that really interesting, and I feel like that's something I could incorporate into the comic as well. So just things that don't really exist as much today, I just thought would be really cool to incorporate, and in some ways, in small ways maybe, show a world that maybe has already happened and could potentially happen again. I've been watching a few different shows and I've been a little bit disheartened, to say the least, about how much the post-apocalyptic human cruelty has been portrayed in media lately, and how it's been so glorified in a lot of ways. And it just makes me sad, because I am someone who believes in humanity, that believes in the best in humanity, and maybe that's naive, but I feel like if more people believed in the best in other people, then maybe we wouldn't live in such a shitty time period and have all these problems that we have, and maybe more people would be taken care of, and maybe just the thought of people being taken care of wouldn't be a politicized issue, because I think that's kind of sad. So overall, I just want to kind of show some things in my comic, not to say that it's going to be perfect or that it's going to be one of those kid shows where nothing really bad happens, but I just feel like there needs to be some hope in the world, and I feel like maybe my comic can help with that to some degree. So yeah, if you want to see more about my comic, about the things that I have developed so far and planning on developing more, then you can go ahead and check out my Patreon at patreon.com/sharreed. And if you want to check out my other social medias, then of course you can like and subscribe, and also check out me everywhere else on the internet at sharreedart. So thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it. Bye.